Hi, I'm Maria Elizabeth Mali, and this is Relationship Alchemy. Today, I'm talking with Kiana Reeves, and we're going to be talking about sex, love, and plants. Kiana, for over a decade, has been studying sex, embodiment, intimacy, pleasure, birth, and wellness. Her work in this field ultimately led her to join Foria, which is a company I adore. You're going to hear more about it, as Chief Education Officer, where she has helped grow and shape the brand over the past 5 years. She's a certified somatic sex educator and sexological body worker, embodiment and intimacy coach, certified full spectrum doula, and a mother. Thank you so much for coming on today, Kiana. I can't wait to talk with you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Sounds like we love a lot of the same stuff.
We sure do. I've actually received a bunch of sexological bodywork myself personally. So I was super psyched to see that that's part of your incredible panel of offerings.
Awesome.
But that's not what we're talking about today. Sex, love, and plants. Where do we begin?
Where do we begin? Let's begin at the dawn of all life on this planet. When, really, like we had our founder, Matthew Gerson. Him and John co-founded the company, and Matthew always used to say, plants invented sex. And that's something that always stayed with me, because when we look at the world around us, like we think that, sex is this kind of like taboo, edgy thing that happens in the human heart and in the human body and, has to do with relationships and everything. And that's true because of our societal beliefs around it. But when you look at what's actually happening outside your door, you step out onto your grass and you look at a flower and a bee, or, two dragonflies mating over the pond, you realize that all life is sexual energy. Yeah. And it's intermingled with plants, it's intermingled with animals, which we are. And so I think that's a nice starting point, is just like to really anchor us in the fact that it's where we come from, it's what we belong to, it's part of everything. And we're not really separate from it, even if we think we are.
Exactly. I love that phrase, plants invented sex, because that really is where it all began, to differentiate versus just cell division, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not to nerd out too far on the science, but I just never looked at it that way, that plants were actually inventors of this wonderful way we have of commingling our DNA and our pleasure.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in your experience, I mean, because we do have so many heady ideas about sex. So there's sex as the animal act, but then we humans get to have sex for pleasure, not just reproduction. Yeah. So that enters another layer. So can you talk a bit about that shift to sex as a pleasure-based choice?
Yeah. So I think something that's really interesting, and there's probably other mammals and other creatures on the planet that have sex for pleasure. I know that bonobo chimps for sure, and dolphins for sure. But if you've ever watched the way that slugs mate, you'll see that it's exquisite. It's like one of the most beautiful things on the planet. And so given that we can't like climb into another animal's body and really experience what they're experiencing, from the lens of being human, something that's really unique to us is the pleasure aspect and the connective aspect, the connectivity of sex, which is something that I don't think we talk a lot about in the sex world. Like we do focus a lot on pleasure, which is wonderful and important and empowering. But the other prong of that that's so important is like the reason that we want a sexual experience with another person at all is not just pleasure. It actually is intimate connection, and all of the neurochemicals that come in those, connective moments like oxytocin and dopamine are very connected to the interaction, but also connected to our pleasure and orgasm. So I see that as a little bit of a trifecta. The sexual experience is allowing us to deepen our relations and our bonds with others, and also at the same time looping us into feeling better in our bodies, bathing us in these incredible baths of all of the neurochemicals that make us feel really good. And that together is why we look at sex, especially at Foria, through the lens of wellness, because it's such it promotes your well-being in such a deep way.
I love that shift and that integration of it as wellness, because sometimes I think if we just speak about it as pleasure, we live in such a production-driven society that it can feel kind of extra, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So when you talk about it as wellness, it brings it back into its central space of being simply a part of a well-rounded, wellness-oriented life.
Yeah.
For women, let's talk specifically about, I mean, Foria has amazing products for women. I want to talk about that, of course, but let's come a little before you even start applying any kind of additional products. There's such an orgasm gap between women and men, typically.
Yes.
And you know, you are doing a lot to address that. There's folks doing a lot to address that differential. And can you speak a bit about that topic? I mean, the orgasm gap and what needs to shift for women to actually want sex more because it'll feel better to them.
Yeah. So the orgasm gap is also known as the pleasure gap. And it's the study of how often people are experiencing orgasm within a partnered context. And there's actually studies too within a solo context. And I don't have the numbers offhand, but they are staggering because the people who are having the least amount of orgasms are women in heterosexual relationships.
Exactly.
And the people who are having the most amount of orgasms are people who are masturbating, and women, I think like it's something like 97% of the time when we masturbate, we can reach orgasm. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's in the upper 60s when it's with a partner. And so there's a huge difference in between how we're able to reach these peak states of pleasure alone versus with partner. And I think a lot of that is around the lack of information and understanding of how the female body works.
Yeah, let's go further into that.
Yeah. So we have this incredible network of erectile tissue distributed throughout the vulva and intravaginally. And you can imagine the way that the amount of blood that needs to come into a penis to make it hard is the exact same amount of blood we need in our erectile tissue, which is distributed under the outer labia, around the G-spot. There's the urethral sponge. There's the perineal sponge that's intravaginally on the posterior side of the vaginal opening. And all of these areas need to be filled with blood before penetration actually feels really, really good.
Yeah.
And our bodies don't work the same. You know, like you look at a penis that can get hard pretty quickly and it's within a few seconds. And that's really not the trajectory for the female body. We can get aroused very quickly in some cases, but in other cases, it might take us 20 to 40 minutes to reach full peak arousal, which is when penetration should actually start happening. And one of the key things here too is the importance of the clitoris. Like 80% of people need clitoral stimulation. 80% of female body people need clitoral stimulation to reach orgasm. And so I think that's another key factor is most people on media and in TV shows and in porn think that boom, 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 you can just have sex and then suddenly she's going to have an orgasm. And that's just likely not the case.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to really land for our listeners that it's super normal not to be able to have a climax through penetration alone.
Yes.
That clitoral stimulation, in addition to penetration, for some women, it's just the clit that'll get them there, you know, that there needs to be more activation inside before vaginal climax can even happen. Yeah. So I just want to really highlight how normal it is not to have the experience that you see in the movies of like bang, 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 and you know, that's just not typically how it works for us because penetration often happens too early, first of all. And second of all, we need that additional stimulation. So I'm so glad you brought that in.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're all connected, right? Like the clitoris is actually part of the G-spot. The G-spot's part of the clitoris. It's all I think it's called the clitoral-urethral complex. I can't say the word specifically, but it's one big incredible wiring that helps us experience pleasure. Yeah. And so especially in partnered contexts, I think that sometimes we feel intimidated to ask our partner to touch our clitoris, or our partner is trying to help us, but it's really like not right on the spot. And so there is this, for both people involved, there's this really important way that we can be present with our partner's pleasure that helps to intensify it. So if you can really, particularly when it comes to the clitoris, particularly when it comes to your own arousal, or if your partner's tracking your arousal, like noticing when the labia are really full and really almost like swollen, that means there's blood flow in some of the primary erectile tissue beds. That's great. Is the clitoris getting bigger? Clitoris actually gets an erection. It's what turns into the shaft of the penis for someone who has a penis. So the clitoris gets an erection when you're starting to actually become aroused. So noticing those things will kind of cue you into going like, yes, she might be lubricated, but her vulva hasn't really changed shape yet. So she needs a lot more attention externally before we even go into penetration. And that's something I think everyone should know. Every couple should know for sure.
It's super important. And also, it's very hard for us as women to guide our partners if we haven't explored ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So it's so important to get to know our own anatomy, because every clit, somebody's best spot on the clit may be toward the middle, but another person's best spot may be slightly over to the side or higher or lower. So you got to figure that stuff out, and then have the confidence and well, I see it as generosity, but I think for a lot of women, it's really that confidence to say, hey, that's not quite on the spot. Try it over here, to really begin to be more of a guide.
Yeah.
I think one of the tragic things I've heard, I was at a conference and I was at a hotel, and I happened to sit at a table with a bunch of people I didn't know who were from a different conference. And somehow, as it often does around me, the conversation turned to sex. Yes. And I'm sure you know the drill.
Yes.
And there was this man at the table, and he said, I wish women would speak up more. Most women I've ever been with are just silent. And I have to try to kind of flail around to figure out what turns her on. And that's why I see being very, not overly controlling, but just being clear as a gift, because you're actually helping the person not have to be a mind reader. Can you say a bit about that dynamic?
Yeah, I think you're speaking to this really interesting thing that probably goes back to childhood. It's like, why aren't we speaking up? Why don't we feel the confidence or even the capacity in a sexual moment to say, not just like, oh, that's not the spot, or ouch, that hurts, or ooh, I'm a little uncomfortable. Like there's so much, women really are socialized to pay attention to other people's comfort a lot of times more than their own. And so especially in sexual moments, it can be hard for us to be like, this isn't working, or like, oh, this, or more of that feels really
more
good.
Of this.
Vocalizing anything. And then when you layer onto it the shame around self-pleasure and masturbation that a lot of children get in their early years, they typically are told not to touch themselves, that's dirty or wrong. And so if they do find pleasure in it, it's in secret and it has to be silent. And so we get this kind of habit in our body mind that when we're experiencing pleasure, our body has to be tense and we have to like hold our breath and be quiet to be able to feel it. And that's just a pattern in the body. And that's something that's really good to identify, right before you reach climax. Are you tense? Are you holding your breath? And are you, like clenching down to try to hold on to it? And if you're doing that, that's a decades old habit of how you reach orgasm. And that's something that all people can work with for sure.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's kind of, as I see it, the sort of first layer of orgasm is that tension based, where you learn to get yourself there by tightening.
Yeah.
But there's a whole other realm of possibility that opens up when you learn to relax.
Yeah.
And so that learning to relax, that leads me mentally, that makes my mind jump toward the arousal oil, for example. With Foria, there's different products for sort of different stages of the process. And can you say a bit about, coming back to plants, how plants can help us relax and open more into the kind of welcoming space for an orgasm versus the striving kind of tightening space?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit into our whole intention around our intimacy line. Our brand from the beginning has really served the female body. And it's because of the pleasure gap and the orgasm gap that we were speaking to earlier that we really were like, why is everyone focused on men's pleasure? You know, we started like, we're almost a decade-year-old brand. And so at the time we started, no one was really addressing or asking the questions that we were. And secondarily, if they were, if there was like, you know, a gel for her pleasure, it was like a nasty chemical that is just going to absorb and like disrupt your pH and make you
Exactly.
stay. So what we've done is we've looked at the trajectory as a whole on arousal and pleasure. And as you know, the brain is the largest sex organ. So we have to start there. Like we have to go, okay, what's going to help somebody relax enough? You know, they're finishing their workday, or they've, you know, put their kids to bed, or they're just like not in their sensuality yet. What's going to help them bring them into their senses and into their body? So we have a few things in our line to help address that. One that's coming out soon that I can't talk about, but we do have a bath salts and a vape pen. Both are to help get in the experience of pleasure and just like, cool, that like I feel good.
Yeah.
And then you go into this exploration of arousal. Well, what is arousal? It's the physiological process of blood flow moving into the genitals. And any of our formulas that are supporting arousal, so we have two primary ones. We have Awaken Arousal Oil. There's one with CBD, one without CBD. And then we have our intimacy suppositories. All of those are meant to support the process of arousal. And when you talk about pleasure, arousal is absolutely the foundation of being able to reach heightened states of pleasure. So the more blood flow in your genitals, the better, the more relaxed your pelvic floor is going to be, the more supple it's going to be, the more touch and stimulation is going to feel good, more likely you are to be lubricating if that's something that your body's naturally doing. And so the plants that we use, particularly in Awaken, have been used historically to support pleasure, to support arousal, to support desire and activation of the body for a long, long, long time. And we've just brought them kind of collectively together into this really incredible formula. And the same with the intimacy suppository. So we were getting this feedback that Awaken was like blowing people's minds. You know, it's like, it's waking up the sensitivity of the clitoris. It's waking up the fullness of the labia. It's helping people lubricate. It's like, you know, the body's getting into responsive desire, where suddenly, you know, you put this oil on and you're like, oh, that feels good. Like I can feel my desire, you know, maybe it's not starting in your head, but your body's responding. And it was working great, but we were like, okay, what about these internal orgasms? What about deeper pleasure? What about penetrative pleasure? And that's where the intimacy suppository comes in. It's really like helping to relax and soften and arouse the internal organs and pelvic floor.
I love that dual focus. And what that's bringing to mind is, what about women who are getting older? Maybe they used to lubricate. Now lubrication is less and the tissue is thinner. Is that where you go toward the intimacy one, like where penetration needs to feel more comfortable again?
Yeah, so I would use both for those, because sometimes there's also like a loss of sensation, or like during perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause, there can be a loss of sensation or like less ability to access orgasm. There's certainly impact on the libido for some people. And then, as you said, the thinning of the vaginal tissues, the not producing as much lubrication naturally. So we're looking at the Awaken and the intimacy suppositories as something that supports pleasure and arousal, where we created the sex oil for lubrication. And sex oil is basically like your all natural, cleanest, use everywhere, slather it on, glide. We call it a glide. That allows for, it protects those really fragile mucosal membrane, the tissue of the vagina, from having any micro tears or any friction that kind of can hurt or sting. So we love, like, that's one of the most amazing formulas, and that can be used by all people. That's not
Yeah,
vulva specific.
exactly. And then there's also, I've been super excited to see there's been this new booty focus.
Oh
So
yeah,
can you talk
booty
a little bit
melts.
about that? Because I feel like people leave out, or they kind of, ew, anal, right?
Yeah,
Like, especially heterosexual people. And it's like,
yeah,
oh, there's a whole wealth of
yeah.
sensation to be had there too. And so can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love the booty melts are really interesting. It's our first time putting CBG into a formula, which is like
Oh,
very relaxing, very like just the first time I tried them, I got to try them obviously before they were launched. And we do this kind of like blind test where I didn't know what the ingredients were, and they tested against other formulas. And I was like,
mm,
wow, like I feel so, I just felt so good. Like I noticed I could feel it. And that's really when you're approaching any type of anal, you want to be super relaxed
yeah.
because as you know, there's two anal sphincters. The outer one is under our conscious control, so we can open and close it at will. The inner one is connected to our autonomic nervous system, and it only relaxes and it only opens when we are relaxed. It's governed by the law of sphincters.
Yeah.
So any force with any kind of anal play is like an absolute no. Any pain, no. Pushing anything in, no. Like, please, no. Also, the anus doesn't self-lubricate. So what we like to encourage people to do is use a booty melt to just help like relax, soften, and help to enliven the area, and then the sex oil for the lubrication.
Mm,
And this is not something I've actually talked about before in regard to this product, but the anus is the backside of the pelvis. And
yeah.
still, like the pelvis is like where all of the blood and the nerves for your pleasure are. So even if you're like not into anal, or you're just wanting exterior anal touch but not internal, using a booty melt to like help just support the pleasure in your pelvis that's available,
Yeah.
like you'll
Yeah.
feel it, you'll feel it. And so
And that's
I
both genders, right? I mean, that's both,
exactly.
any gender could feel it.
Oh, in particular for people with prostates. I mean, if you want to talk
Yes.
about the male G spot, the prostate is the male G spot. It's actually the same tissue in utero that gets differentiated. And so
Mm,
it is the place where if you learn how to, touch that in a way that feels good to your partner, it can be incredibly orgasmic for them.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to highlight, because something you said earlier about those really gross gels and stuff, that all of what part of what I love about these products is that they're natural, they're plant-based, while they're not necessarily meant to be applied specifically before oral. It's safe to do oral, even if you've
Absolutely.
used the arousal oil before, right? They're
Yeah.
safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're
Yeah.
safe and they smell good and they feel good. And um, they're definitely lickable. Definitely you can get them everywhere and be totally fine with it.
That reminds me, one of the ones that I use personally pretty much every day that we haven't talked about is the breast oil. So years ago, I learned to do breast massage to help with releasing stagnation, with just keeping the energy moving in the breast so there isn't too much buildup in the lymph.
Yeah.
And the breast, I have very cystic breasts. So I mean, I have to kind of keep things moving or I get painful cysts. So I use the breast massage oil daily as really an intimacy with myself and also just self-care, like just keeping my breasts happy. And it's funny because I can't vouch, but it feels like they're responding. It feels like they're fuller in a way, or something is happening as I've been doing this as a practice. Can you say a bit about the breast oil? Because I just think it's great.
It's one of my favorite products. And it's kind of our best kept secret, I would say, because it's such a beautiful formula. There's like violet in there, there's dandelion in there, there's castor oil, like all of these things are just so nourishing for that tissue specifically. And when we formulated it, it was again, like what herbs and plants have historically been used to support the health of this region in the body. And that's formulas concentrated with them. And why I say it's the best kept secret is because like people don't, unless you have a breast care routine for a reason like you do, most people don't. So like, why do I need a breast
Yeah.
oil? Like, I'll just put
Yeah.
my body oil on it. But the breasts are very tender and they're a very sensitive, fluctuating part of our body. And one of the other reasons I love this product is like, there's so much societal conditioning around breasts and how we relate to them personally, how they change, how the nipples change after breastfeeding. Are they big enough? Are they too small? Are they, do I have nipple hair? Do I have stretch marks? It's like, there's this way that society is like so hyper focused on breasts that they became kind of externalized for others as opposed to ourselves. So especially when we did the launch campaign around it and the photo shoot, it was all about that connection with self and all about the love for the body as it exists and like how beautiful and powerful and important it is to be connected. The breasts sit over the heart. It's really this like central part of the body that holds so many of our most intimate experiences with lovers, with children, with ourselves. And they're so connected to our sexuality too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. It's one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
And I love how you put that about having that relationship with yourself. Like the breasts tend to be externalized as this thing for others, or, it's this thing we get noticed for a lot that grabs a lot of attention. And just to be able to have a moment with myself every morning to just tend to myself, to move the energy, to be with myself, that they're really mine,
Exactly.
It's like they really become mine in that way. I'd love to talk a bit about what you've noticed as a sexological. I always have trouble with that word, sexological body worker. I want to just highlight the profession for a moment, because I think a lot of people maybe don't know what it is. And it's been hugely helpful for me, especially in recovery from 2 surgeries. I got 2 hip replacements fairly young because I couldn't walk for years and my hips were shot, like literally bone spurs growing out. So they had to be replaced. It wasn't like a choice really.
Yeah.
And, my self-image took a hit after that, scars, limited mobility, all the things. And so sexological bodywork was a really safe way for me to reconnect with myself and rediscover my pleasure and my body without the pressure of it being with a partner, because I don't suffer from this a lot, but we can tend to get into performance mode with a partner because we want to please them or we want them to feel good. And so that can be somewhat disconnecting. So can you speak a bit about your experiences of sexological body, like why someone might want to get sexological body work, where it's helpful, things like that?
It's such an incredible profession. I have such deep respect for my fellow colleagues in this space, because it's to work in the most intimate spaces with sometimes a complete stranger and hold the space for their nervous system and their, body mind to experience deep levels of repair in sexual experiences. And so what sexological bodywork is, it's hands-on sex education and exploration. And it's very much tracking the connection between the nervous system, like what's happening in our nervous system's response to feeling safe with, exploration of our genitals, with consent, with embodiment, and touch. And within that, being able to explore what brings me pleasure. And within that, being able to explore, like, where are my boundaries? What does my true yes feel like? What does my true no feel like? And to have those boundaries met with so much love and clarity that there can be such a deep reset in someone's sense of safety and sense of self in sexual moments.
And sense of power,
sense of self-knowledge, all of it. Yeah. So I just have such great respect for the profession and the people who are, I don't have a personal practice right now just because I have a bunch of other things, but
you're doing so many things.
I did for many years. And it was just such an honor to like be with people in the experience of that reconnection of an engagement with their genitals, with their whole being, whole self.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize, I mean, so if someone's looking for a sexological body worker, there are resources online.
Yeah.
You can find people locally to you. And it can, you can involve genital touch or not. You can
Absolutely.
go internal or stay external. Like what I love about it is it's client directed.
Yes.
It's focused on your needs.
Yes.
And this is what's so powerful for us as women, I think, is to be in a space where we get to receive and also voice, like practice voicing. That feels good. No, that doesn't feel good. I like that. More of that, less of that. No, definitely not that, whatever it is.
Exactly.
But we get to practice that in a context with someone who's not going to react because they're not our partner with their own host of insecurities. And at least when I've had it done, the person was wearing gloves. Like it's
always gloved.
So it's like, it's clinical, but warm and connected. And you really get to learn your own body. You get to claim your power to ask for what you want. You get to discover. I discovered things that I didn't realize I loved and now are a part of our regular play, because I just didn't know before that felt great to me. So I highly recommend that, especially if someone is learning to feel themselves for the first time, as opposed to being completely other oriented.
Yes.
It's a great way to do that without the pressure to give back.
Yes.
It's one-way touch, it's receiving, it's communicating, and really, I think women, well, all women and really people of any gender are well served by doing that kind of work, because then when we come into our relationships, we're that much more informed and capable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you did that. It's a beautiful, beautiful profession.
Yeah.
So, folks who are listening, if you're curious about Foria, there's a link down in the show notes to go to the website. You can learn more. There's blogs, really great blogs. The products are gorgeous. You'll also find a 20% off code. If you'd like to make an order, I'd love to make that code available to you. So get that code in the show notes as well. And there's also Kiana's personal Instagram, which is the bomb. She shares such great information and just is beautiful to watch on Instagram. So go follow Kiana on Instagram as well as Foria. And is there anything else that perhaps we haven't touched on or that you want to make sure to bring in before we wrap up?
No, I feel like we touched on a lot of good stuff. I feel like just a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I so appreciate your coming on today. And I cannot wait for people to have more pleasure and more access to pleasure with plants and all the things. And so, thank you for being a part of the company that just makes such beautiful products. I'm actually not a brand ambassador for anything except Foria. And, full disclosure, folks who are listening, I am a brand ambassador for Foria. I approached Kiana because I wanted to introduce you to her brilliance and also to have access to these amazing products, because I really think there's no shame in getting some additional help in connecting with ourselves and in relaxing, especially in a culture where we do tend to be so production oriented and regimented. It can be hard to transition into receptive open space. And what I've found is that the arousal oil and the CBD vape pen and all the things just help to kind of ease that transition into being more receptive. And then there's the sex oil for when you're actually getting down to it. So it's just a beautiful suite of products. And thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. So glad to be here today.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So until next time, folks, remember that a great relationship, including with yourself and your sexuality, starts with you.